Well, pay equity and equal employment opportunity. Those are topics that our next guest, Ellen Staurowsky, has been researching as a professor in the Department of Sports Management at Drexel University. And she joins me now. Welcome to the show.
Hello.
Now, one criticism about U.S. women's pay in sports is that they don't bring in the same kind of revenue as men. Is that true, especially when you look at the audiences?
There's been a study here in looking at the U.S. Soccer Federation's reports, and what we found is that our women's team has actually brought in more revenue in terms of attendance than men's. And so I think we really need to look more closely at that revenue argument and really understand what's behind it, which is a structure that produces this kind of inequity.
And so what are some of the other arguments that you tend to hear raised about not giving women equal pay?
Well, I think the revenue argument is a big one, but, quite frankly, the other argument is that somehow that women just are not going to generate as much interest, or that they're just not as interesting to watch. And, Nike just reported today that, that the women's soccer jersey, home soccer jersey for the U.S. team is selling better than any other soccer jersey on their website this year. So those kinds of criticisms, I think, really need to be re-examined in light of the 21st century, where we have top-flight female athletes who are competing at very high levels.
And so, as we know, the U.S. women's football team recently filed a lawsuit ahead of the World Cup alleging institutionalized gender discrimination, and that's shown in differences in pay, medical care, travel arrangements, and overall workload between the men's and women's teams. Where do things stand with the lawsuit, as well as the support for women in this sport?
Yeah. Well, I think the support has been rising. Here in the United States, there's just been tremendous discussion about the support for the women's team, and I think that's going to continue as we move into this weekend. Relative to their lawsuit, they're currently in mediation right now, and it will be interesting to see what happens after the World Cup is over and how those talks and mediation go. They did have a settlement conversation back in March, and that did not result in a resolution of the issues. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens after the World Cup is done.
And we've certainly seen that Australia has taken the lead, at least trying to get gender parity when it comes to pay. Are there any other countries that either pay their male and female football players equally, or at least commensurate given their levels of achievement?
Yeah. The Netherlands just announced just a day or two ago that that they've made a commitment to equal pay, and they're going to be moving in the direction of progressively reaching that goal by 2023. There's also been other countries that certainly, other women's national teams that have certainly been pressing for this, including Norway and Sweden. And I think that's what's so interesting about this moment, is the fact that all of these women's teams are really advocating for themselves and really pointing out that that they're being treated as second-class citizens, and that they that they deserve much better treatment than what they've been given.
And we also have to look at tennis as an example of a sport that really has done a better job when it comes to equal pay. What do you think it would take for football to follow tennis's example when it comes to pay?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think it's the will to do it, quite frankly. I think there has to be fundamental respect for the athletes who are competing in a sport, and fundamental respect for women and the value of women. And I think once we begin with that premise, then everything else flows out of that. There's been a very interesting conversation about the French team, Olympique Lyonnais, And one of the things which has distinguished that team is the fact that there's been such a tremendous commitment to gender equity there. And so, and also not only a commitment to gender equity, but also the end result being that they've been able to grow women's soccer in France very effectively with tremendous interest. So I think there's a lesson to be learned there that, that when an organization recognizes that if they treat their women the way that they treat their men, that, that it's going to be a better situation for everybody. I think that will be a good start toward achieving that goal.
All right, thank you so much. Professor Ellen Staurowsky there from the Department of Sports Management at Drexel University.